Hello.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
I'm good.
Check it. All right, cool. So let's just do a round of very, very quick introductions and get to the bottom of why we're here. So my name is Alex Abdullayev. I have a PhD in music history. My primary focus in studying music is jazz, but also I'm very interested in cinema music, game music, and just kind of like how those ideas in composition overlap and how they create a gestalt experience in terms of storytelling and narrative and audiovisual shorthand.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Farthing. I'm an art restorer and conservator. My particular interest, which is what caused this panel, is in applying fine art theory to things that are not technically considered fine art. I'm also very, very interested in the ways that we tell each other information without physically saying it. So visual narrative shorthand, audio narrative shorthand, things like that, which is sort of what created this panel. And then our friend on the computer here.
Hello, my name is Cameron Bages. I am a game designer and developer. I've been in the scene for like 5 years now. Oh my gosh. And Metal Gear is one of the franchises that really got me into deep into gaming. Yeah, I know this panel to me is my expertise comes from just a little bit of the behind the scenes in making a game and also the high level design that goes into narrative storytelling.
Excellent, very good. So Cameron, since I'm not sure if we're going to be able to share screen with my slides,
I actually have it open on one of my other monitors here. Don't worry, I've got the full Autocon setup here.
Yeah, so I did add a few other slides. Let me go ahead and send you the link. Actually, if you have access to that one, you have access to all the additions.
Yeah, I'm on the live one right now, the same one that you're on right now.
Okay, perfect. So in that case, what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and get started, shall we? So give me 2 seconds to do all of that, and we'll get rolling. Okay, so and I'm just gonna tell you when we're switching slides so that you can just do this on your own.
Cool.
So you might not be on the screen, but you will be here in spirit. All right. Okay, so
I'm coming through everyone's codec.
Perfect. All right. So while that's loading. All right. Yay. So the topic of today's talk is choosing your own legacy, and Hideo Kojima, the Metal Gear series, and Post-Modernism, which is a whole entire mouthful. I'm gonna actually try speaking into a microphone so I don't have to yell.
The more long words you use, the smarter you sound, and the more likely they are to give you a panel.
That's right. That's a fun fact. That's how we literally got every single one of them. So, all right, very good. So let's get rolling. So, the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard notoriously stated that the futility of everything that comes to us from the media is the inescapable consequence of the absolute inability of that particular stage to remain silent. In other words, one of the most interesting assertions that Baudrillard has made is that in watching media, in observing media, it is not in fact you who is watching the media, but in fact it is the media who is watching and studying you. All of your knowledge, all of your relationships, all of your accumulated personal human experiences are concatenated and spat back at you by the conglomerates that essentially create this stuff. So in a way, we have a very intensely personal and close-knit relationship with the media which we consume. And it is from this standpoint that I would love to start this conversation about Metal Gear series and postmodernism. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my wife, Caitlin, who's going to talk about postmodernism.
So in order to understand what postmodernism is, we kind of understand how Metal Gear is postmodern. We have to understand what is postmodernism. So postmodernism, let's break it down. Post, meaning after. Click it. After. Modernism, meaning modernism. So really, postmodernism is about being after, specifically better than, the art period described as modernism. So, what the fuck is modernism? Modernism was an early 1900s art form that kind of came out of World War I. Basically, pre-World War I, you'll notice that a lot of art is very representational. This is a thing. The candle is a candle. It may mean things other than a candle, but it's still a candle. When World War I happened, it was kind of the most terrible thing anyone had ever experienced ever. And the visual language that we have was not enough to describe what people were going through. People had a lot going on inside that they physically could not get out into the visual language that we had. So this is where we start getting things like abstraction, because we're like, I have to process this somehow. It has to get out of me somehow. So we're going to throw paint at a canvas and hope that it works. This includes a lot of styles such as expressionism, abstraction, cubism. You're going to see a lot, Picasso is the beginning of modernism. Henri Matisse is the beginning of modernism. It really, really rejects representational art in favor of expressive art. Particularly, it's more about what the artist is doing and what the artist wants to convey. This is very much where we get this idea of an artist as a genius. This is very much where we get the idea of an artist as, the artist knows everything and has done everything super intentionally, and everything has a very specific meaning, and if you don't get it, you're just dumb. This is kind of where that comes from. This also comes from the idea that, all progress is good progress, and it doesn't matter what it does to people, because if we just make enough progress, we'll eventually have a utopia.
We learned that lesson the hard way in 2021.
Yeah. As we all know, that's not really how it works. This was very, idealistic. The artist is a genius. Everything's going to be great. Da-da-da-da. Then the postmodernists came in and said, guys, that's not how that works. No, this is not how this works. So postmodernism is sort of in response to modernism. Basically, the postmodernists thought the modernists were up their own asses and said, all right, we're going to use your language to make fun of you. So postmodernism is using that same visual language of, we don't have direct representational art still, we're still doing expression, abstraction, stuff like that, but there's a self-awareness to it. There's a humor to it. There's particularly a level of camp to it. There's a big blurring in between what makes high art and what makes sort of layperson art. Because with the modernists, they were very, I'm a genius, this is high art, this is fine art. There was very specific techniques that were fine art, there were very specific techniques that weren't. Postmodernism went, fuck that. If I want to make anything art, I can make anything art. Which is why you get to see stuff like this.
So side note, we're going to be saying the fuck word a lot.
Yeah, I swear a lot. If anyone's offended, please let me know. I'll watch my mouth.
I'm offended by you not saying it more.
Hi, I like you. So this is where we get Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol tends to come out of this a lot. Andy Warhol's big thing was, one, I want to make money, which at the time a modernist would be like, no, I don't make art to make money. I make art to express myself, which, yes, absolutely perfectly valid. However, there's a long tradition of art existed to make money. And Andy Warhol's like, God, I just want to make money. So he was using silk screening, which at the time was just a commercial process. Many of you might know silk screening through making t-shirts. It's one of the few ways that we can get ink to stick to fabric reliably. At the time, it was used to make posters, prints, anything. It was basically the version of an Epson printer.
So this is actually kind of one of the early examples of the commercial interacting with the fine arts.
Yes.
And Warhol was kind of a pioneer in that field and is widely regarded to this day as somebody who kind of broke some very new territory in that field.
Yes, so this is all about using technology as it exists. There's no such thing as fine art, lay art. It's all art. It can all be high-minded fine art. Then we also have one of my favorite art styles that leads into this, which is Dadaism. I am sure all of you are vaguely familiar with this. This is the fountain by Mondrian, where he took a urinal, flipped it upside down, and called it art. It was created to piss people off. The whole point of this was to say, hey, anything can be art, and I'm going to make you mad about it. Which is also a very sort of where postmodernism comes out of, because it's making fun of modernism. It's pushing the boundaries of modernism. So
the funny thing about this is that, so Duchamp made this clearly a mockery of fine art, and then he signed it, and he didn't even bother signing his own fucking name on the thing.
Oh yeah, no, it was a reference to a cartoon, a very well-known cartoon at the time. So I do want to state, these are very basic baby art history 101 definitions of postmodernism and modernism, because they are art styles that still exist. They are still being studied, they are still being contributed to. So, as things are contributed to, they change a little bit. You can't fully define something until it's over, like the show Lost in the middle when they had the writers and they couldn't end it. So if you want to study this more, there's fascinating information out there. Absolutely go check out the Met, absolutely go check out the Museum of Modern Art. They will give you a much more detailed entrance into this, but we only have an hour and a half.
I do also want to kind of point out some of the other ways that postmodernism does this, and specifically the spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson, which is a classic example of functionality because it's technically a jetty that you're intended to walk, and it's kind of this long spiraling thing. Another pretty classic example is Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, which itself kind of follows along with the idea of deconstructionism, which itself is kind of an offshoot of postmodernism.
Yeah. So as we're talking about Metal Gear, the things I want you to keep in mind about postmodernism: camp, making fun of established tropes and norms, a certain self-awareness, and an idea of subjective reality. That's one thing that's very important in postmodernism, which I kind of forgot to mention because I'm on caffeine. Is that, in modernism, the artist was the end-all be-all god of the art. What the artist said mattered, and that was it. That's all that mattered. If you had a different opinion, you were wrong. Postmodernism very much pushes against that and says that the viewer's interpretation of the art is just as valid. And the viewer's interpretation is sometimes more valid than the artist's. If a whole bunch of viewers say, hey, this means X, and the artist goes, no, the artist is wrong. This is where we get the idea of death of the author.
So one of the most sterling examples is somebody asking, I forget who it was, but somebody asking a writer, like, so what does your book mean? And the author responding, well, what would you like it to mean?
Yeah. So this is very much about audience interaction with art creates meaning within the art, which is why we apply this to video games, because it's exactly what
this is
happening.
Literally what is going on here.
Yeah. So,
okay. So
again, keep in mind, subjective realities. Multiple people can be right. And
camp.
Yeah, camp, self-awareness, a certain level of humor, and making fun of and going against existing tropes.
Okay. All right. So very quick conversation about Hideo Kojima. I'm not gonna spend too much time dwelling on this because this is like a Wikipedia entry. Like you guys can just look this up yourselves. But he was born in 1956 in Satagaya, Tokyo, Japan. So like most people who were born in that age, they were affected both by the aftermath of World War II and by the impeding progress of Japanese industry and commerce. So he is particularly well known for the Metal Gear series, obviously, but on top of that, he was also responsible for Police Knots, which is a kind of a visual novel that was released on Sega Saturn, Zone of the Enders 1 and 2 on PlayStation 2, and Death Stranding most recently across a bunch of different platforms. So his work is primarily in video games is primarily inspired by Shigeru Miyamoto's work on Super Mario Brothers, but his influences go far beyond that, particularly because Kojima considers himself to be a kind of a connoisseur of Western cinema, which is, we don't really account for how little Western cinema actually percolates into Japan. And so for Kojima, this is an extremely niche interest because Japanese cinema is extremely robust and very far-reaching and influential. So his primary influences are a lot of 1980s science fiction, like The Terminator, Blade Runner, but he was also influenced by a variety of different anime, including Neon Genesis Evangelion, and then, of course, Space Odyssey 2001.
So this is akin to being into anime in, like, the 90s?
Yeah. It was a very, very niche thing. So he's widely recognized as an auteur in the video game development community. And what is an auteur?
So an auteur is something we kind of talked about when I was talking about modernism. An auteur is someone who has complete and utter control, and basically every single decision they've made in the game pushes into the artwork, pushes into the meaning of it. Basically, it's sort of like Michael Bay.
Yes.
Every single decision that he makes.
In case you've ever wondered, Michael Bay is an auteur.
Yes,
I will die
yes,
on this hill.
Yes. There's a very, very set aesthetic. There is a very, very set, way that he does things. And he has complete and utter control over every single thing in there.
Correct.
Yeah, and an important piece of Kojima's auteurship is on the box of pretty much every Metal Gear game. It says a Hideo Kojima game. Like, he's like, this is mine, I made it. Here's my name everywhere. And in the only game that it doesn't have his name on the box, which is Metal Gear Solid 5, it says his name before literally every single mission.
Yes, absolutely. Just because he couldn't tell us to fuck off hard enough. But the other things include like taking a very strong stance on political and environmental issues. Like you can tell that a lot of auteurship is very intensely political, and it portrays a very strong personal stance on politics and various other issues. And in Kojima's work, this is largely reflected through his extreme stance on anti-nuclear proliferation. for obvious reasons, because Japan was very intensely and severely affected by the American bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The issues of subjective reality, as of course indicated by his interest in such novels as Do Androids Dream by Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, and the adaptation to cinema of Blade Runner, and the subversion of expectations. So we're going to talk about all three of those kind of in stride. All right, moving on. Cameron, I'm going to have you take over the chronology and the release chronology of Metal Gear.
Yes. So looking at the series from a full beginning to end, it actually technically begins in what known as end media res, which is kind of in the middle of it. So the base part of it is that the game. This is not a timeline that Kojima from the very beginning was like, okay, I'm going to make 8 games, and I'm going to start in the middle, then I'm going to go back to the beginning a little bit, and then I'm going to jump all the way to the end. And it was actually released in, first of all, just Metal Gear, just the basic one with Solid Snake, which you can see is the first release chronologically, but kind of sits in the middle. Was just sort of a game that he made, was like, fun shooter game. It's going to be an action shooter. You can tell by the cover that screen is actually ripped from Terminator. That pose, if you compare it to some of the Terminator promotional work, it is like basically stolen. And it was just supposed to be a standard, shooter sort of game, but unfortunately they realized due to technical limitations they can only have about 4 bullets on screen at one time, and 4 bullets does not make an action shooter. So actually, out of necessity, it began to rotate into a stealth-oriented game where you tried to have as little bullets on screen as possible at all times, because at the beginning of the game, like 3 or 4 will kill you. And that game did so well that a sequel was made, Solid Snake, which was never released in America except through different collections. It's never been released individually. Also did very well, and originally the final piece of that Metal Gear trilogy was Metal Gear Solid, which was, kind of mentioning this is one of the early games on the PlayStation 1, like before even the dual analog, that iconic PlayStation, with the 2 joysticks in the middle. This was before that controller existed, and it was just the D-pad. And the Solid was supposed to be the 3D graphics of it, and that was the trilogy. That was everything. That was all marked up. And then Metal Gear Solid sold so many PlayStations that when the PlayStation 2 was coming along, they were like, hey, Kojima, we need to sell more PlayStations. We need another Metal Gear game. And he went, okay, you know what? Actually, I have a lot more technology at my disposal now. The PlayStation 2 is a lot more powerful than the PlayStation 1. I can do a lot of really cool stuff with this. I will make another game that does everything I wanted the first one to do, but I'm going to do it my way, and you're going to be okay with this. And everyone was like, as long as it sells PlayStations, we literally do not care. So that happened, and then that also did amazingly well. And they're like, all right, Kojima, you sold us 1 million PlayStations. Go sell us 1 million more and make us another Metal Gear game. And he went, fine, but this is not going to be like any of the other Metal Gear games because I'm tired of making games like that, and you're going to be okay with this. And they were like, once again, as long as you sell 1 million more PlayStations, we do not care. So that's where Metal Gear Solid 3 happened, which is actually going back to before any of the other games, where you actually learn the backstory of the main antagonist of the series, and you sort of see how he turns from a regular American soldier into the criminal mastermind that you've grown to know and hate throughout the rest of the games that exist at this point. Because numbers continue counting, the PlayStation 3 came out, and guess who needed to sell 1 million PlayStations? So they were like, all right, Kojima, you know the drill. And he was like, I hate the drill. And they were like, here's more money than you can turn down. And he was like, fine, but I'm going to make this game my way. And they're like, yeah, we understand. Just make it sell 1 million PlayStations. So Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, which was one of the most technically impressive at the time. There was a lot happening in this game, and this was supposed to be the finale. This is, I believe, if memory serves, the game ends with the characters literally riding off into the sunset. It is done. The end. You can't do anything else. Every loose thread is wrapped up in a bow. Nothing can come after this in terms of the Metal Gear franchise. And it's the end. Finito. No more. So, this is well before the PlayStation 4, however, not well before the PlayStation Portable, which also needed to sell 1 million PlayStations. And it did not, even with the help of Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, which, because there's nowhere to go forward, Kojima went backwards again, kind of like, okay, let's see how Big Boss, like, really, built his army, built, all this stuff. Let's keep expanding on that backstory a little bit. And that's where we get Peace Walker. And then finally, they were like, Konami decided to just go absolutely crazy, and we all know this part of the history where they basically locked Kojima in a basement and they said, make Metal Gear Solid 5. I'm sure everyone saw that meme that was posted where he was Kojima outside in a compound, and it was like, breaking news, Konami lets Kojima have 15 minutes outside, to which a Kojima parody account replied, this is a lie, they did not let me outside. And Metal Gear Solid 5 certainly is a game that was released that you can play. And at that point, Kojima was like, I am done. I don't care how many PlayStations you need to sell. I am not going to make any more Metal Gear games. In which case, Sony said, okay, hi, come work for us now. You don't have to make a Metal Gear game, but you can do literally whatever you want. It just needs to sell 1 million PlayStation 4s. And he was like, okay, this guy delivers boxes and drinks pee. And you know what? It sold 1 million PlayStations.
Oh, Kojima.
So that's the sort of behind the scenes Kojima side story of why all of these games came out. And it pretty much from Solid onward, it was a very business-oriented piece, and each one was supposed to be the last game. And because of that, you really see a lot of really interesting kind of narrative holes that are just filled, and some narrative holes that are created just so they can be filled later. And this story is infamous for being so confusing and convoluted, and it's because they literally just kept stapling things to it. That said, they stapled a lot of really cool, interesting things to it, and we're going to dive into some of the artistic merit of those staples.
All right.
Right. So, thank you, Cameron, for that invigorating discussion of the timeline. I literally was just like, okay, so you see how like the two timelines don't line up? That's because they didn't release them in order. And Cameron comes out and just whips out this entire spiel, which is great. I'm here for it. Love you, buddy.
Love you too.
So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take all the Metal Gear games apart piece by piece and talk about like what makes them interesting and how they fit into the postmodern ethos. And we're going to start at the very beginning chronologically with Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. So first thing I want to do is I want to show you guys a little bit of the gameplay from the original Metal Gear. So I'm going to exit out of this for a second. And
yeah, make sure you count the bullets on screen.
all right, let's see. Okay, so we're gonna pause right here. So the music kind of slaps already, like not gonna lie. So what's interesting about this? Well, let's start by talking about like what the conceptualization for Metal Gear was. This is in no small part a game that was largely a product of the limitations of the hardware for which it was developed. Cameron already touched on this, but I'm gonna just go ahead and bring this point home. What the original conceit for Metal Gear was just a traditional side-scrolling shooter, which was to be released on the Famicom in Japan. Now, the Famicom never came out in the United States. It was a Japanese-only system. However, it was not as powerful as the competing systems at the time, specifically the Nintendo Entertainment System. So the Famicom was, I'm sure you noticed, it was limited by no parallax scrolling screen refresh, so you couldn't just smoothly go from one screen to the next. You have a map that you're playing around in, and then as soon as you hit the edge, the screen has to refresh, so the new map has to get loaded, and you get booted into another part of the map. So that's why there's like this very janky, like black they cut to black, cut to the next screen transition. The other limitation, of course, is that you didn't have the processing power for moving particles on screen. So you could only have about 4 bullets at any given time, a very limited number of moving objects on the screen at any time period. And in a game that's intended to be an action shooter, this presents a problem. How do you have an action shooter with now action or shooting? So in other
Make
words,
a stealth game instead.
right. So in other words, what he had to do is he had to compromise. So he ended up kind of going back to the drawing board, revamping the whole design document for this and saying like, okay, so we can't have a shooter. What can we have? Hey, how about like an infiltration game? Because he was a big fan of the movie The Great Escape from 1963 with Steve McQueen. And he was like, oh, this is actually a great idea. So what that meant was that he had to make some shortcuts. So that meant that there were fewer enemies, smaller levels, less dialogue. And this became kind of the staple. So interestingly enough, like this is actually also noticeable in the in-game cutscenes. Cameron, do you want to say something about that?
Of the Metal Gear cutscenes? The in-game cutscenes are actually take place over the now famous Codex system. So much like I am speaking to you now in very limited visuals, so too are the Codex screens where you see a static image of person A on the left and Snake on the right, and they say words at him, and the game goes, and then Snake just portrait changes to some sort of reaction face, and then he goes, and text appears on screen, and it looks like a radio because sure. And that is how the story is really communicated. Even in instances of Snake reacting to things live in game and talking with people in front of him, there is still that sort of like the game stops. There's no, you don't get the dialogue as you're going around, and someone says some sort of one-liner, like the infamous sort of you run into one of the first guards in the game, and he goes, "Oh, I feel asleep," and then he's asleep.
Yep. Yeah.
And also the boss introductions were, much the same, where the Metal Gear games nowadays are famous for their, very long-winded explanations of their entire backstory and why they're very sad, and you're going to feel bad for killing them, and then you kill them, and then they're like, hey, remember, now you feel extra bad. Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 did very much not have this for the boss battles, and Metal Gear 2 actually includes my favorite Metal Gear enemy of all time. His opening dialogue is, "I'm shoot gunner." And then you fight him, and then he dies and says nothing.
Yep. So it's the infamous "I am the shotgunner" from Metal Gear 1. So
no, the original is a shoot gunner.
Yep. But the interesting thing is that even with the limitations of the technology, Kojima was able to incorporate some of the meta-narrative and the meta-game components into this game. So like, for instance, at one point, you get a call from the antagonist, Big Boss, who taunts you and says to you, like, haha, you've been playing the game for too long. Perhaps it is time for you to put down the controller and go take a break.
Yeah, does everyone remember the part where they had to unplug the controller and plug it into a second slot?
That's later.
Yeah.
You're spoiling it for them.
Okay. It's still relevant.
Yes.
So what we're talking about is, Cameron's talked about when in video game design, you want to suck your players in. You want them to feel like they are the character that they're playing as. But moments like this rip you straight out. And they remind that, you are not actually Snake or whoever the fuck you're supposed to be. Right. You're a dude on a couch holding a controller.
Yeah.
And it's that same sort of idea of it's forcing you to live both of these realities at the same time. It's forcing you to, on the one hand, forget that you're a dude sitting on a couch with a controller, and then slap you in the face with the fact that you're a dude sitting on a couch with a controller.
So this tonal shift in theme and motif and ludonarrative dissonance is essentially meant to take you out of your element. So you kind of get this very weird, surreal component to it, which we're going to come back to both in Metal Gear 1 or Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. Yeah. Now, Metal Gear Solid 2 is basically kind of more of the same but better, because Metal Gear 2 was released on the MSX, which was a considerably more powerful system. It was capable of much more interesting music. It was the visuals are better. And so it's really kind of the same game, just with a bunch of improvements and advancements. It's a big step forward. The only thing I really wanted to play from that one is the soundtrack, the Solid Snake theme. So let me go ahead and play that. That's not it. This is it. So before we go on to talking about the Metal Gear Solid entrances, I want to just say just a couple of words about the soundtrack here, because this is kind of my wheelhouse and I do like talking about soundtracks. So in a big way, the soundtrack kind of informs you of a lot of the things that are going to be happening in this game in very, very subtle ways. And if you want to find out more about how that happens, come to our panel at 8 p.m. today. It's in the same room. But seriously, the way the soundtrack integrates with the game is fascinating because it communicates all of the information about the setting and the plot and the tone of the game without actually telling you these things. So a huge chunk of the game's narrative is done for the narrator by effectively having something like this as your introductory sequence. It presents you with all of the information you need about how you're supposed to approach this game. And then once again, it kind of does the same thing as Metal Gear 1 does and kind of rips the rug out from under you and says like, haha, you thought, but you were wrong. So in many ways, again, as I mentioned, Metal Gear 2 is as much of a step forward in games, particularly in the Metal Gear franchise, as Metal Gear 1 was for gaming in general. Cameron, anything to add?
No, I think you about covered everything that is really relevant about these two games. They're very influential, and they're an important standing ground point for moving forward in this series. But in and of themselves, they're in reflection to the rest of the series, not too much going on, just because they're a million years old.
Yeah, they're janky and they're old. Okay, so let's move on to the bulk of the Metal Gear series. Most of us know these, so we're going to start with Metal Gear Solid next. I frequently like applying the term Gesamtkunstwerk to this game, and it's a term...
If any of you are fans of Brian David Gilbert, you know what this means.
But for those of you who are not, basically the idea behind Gesamtkunstwerk is that it is a total work of art, where every aspect of the product serves to contribute something to your understanding of it. And this was coined by the German composer Richard Wagner in relation to his operas like The Ring of the Nibelungen Cycle, Tannhäuser, the Flying Dutchman, et cetera, et cetera. And basically what it means is that the set designs, the audio, the costumes, the text of the opera, all of that combines to create just a very controlled, very densely focused experience that you have to be completely immersed into. So what really happens in Metal Gear Solid is this idea of the interdependence of the medium, where the concept art, the music, the art direction, the design, the level design, the voice acting, all of that stuff really combines to create a gestalt experience. So one of my favorite things to do is to look at the concept art, because concept art can be extremely revealing about what a game is supposed to be and how it's supposed to communicate itself to you, the gamer. So this right here on the left is the iconic picture of Solid Snake drawn by Yoji Shinkawa for the concept art for Metal Gear Solid. And if we take a look at it, there's certain things that we can see about it. It's very different than the typical action hero pose that was literally lifted from the movie Terminator for Metal Gear 1. And here it's a very different approach to the art. It's sketchy, it's very nebulous, it's intentionally designed to kind of look a little bit off kilter. And if any of you've seen the concept art that's in the actual booklets for Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The characters are not really drawn in solid lines. They're drawn as kind of vague suggestions by Shinkawa. They're very nebulously outlined, so your mind kind of starts starts filling in the gaps between the breaches in the line. And this is kind of transferable to the way these characters are outlined, because when they're first introduced to you in the game, they're like, oh, cool, they're like the generic bad guys. They're the Fox unit, like the bad guys, go kill them. And then you gradually, piece by piece, start finding out these different things about Sniper Wolf and Psycho Mantis and Vulcan Raven. And you start really getting into it. And a lot of this happens on your own personal level. Like, your engagement with these characters in the game shapes your thoughts and opinions about them. Similar things can be said about the music by Kazuki Muraoka, which I'm going to play for you right now. One of the things that's really fascinating is this idea of tonal contrast. Actually, I think I have it here. Yeah. Yes, perfect. So the way Metal Gear Solid opens is as follows. We have this intro sequence. So we're not completely deafened by this. So we have this intro screen where, and then we have the gunshot when you press the start button, and boom, we go to the game. The first thing that happens is this. So let me break down what just happens here, right? So we begin with this extremely techno, science fiction, futuristic soundtrack. We have the gunshot. The tone is set. We're expecting this to be a big, explosive action game. We start underwater in this really nebulous environment, and a Gaelic opera is going on. So we have an immediate tonal shift from this ultra-serious, futuristic sci-fi thing to something that's intensely intimate and very, very emotional. Right? So this is kind of an uncommon thing, but it sets the tone for pretty much everything else that's going to be happening in the game. The tonal whiplash in Metal Gear Solid 1 is all over the charts. Like, at one point, you're literally having conversations with Mei Ling about dinosaurs and movies and shit like that. And then the next thing you're doing is you're literally listening to this, like, sniper woman from Kurdistan, like, talk to you about how, like, she used to watch people die through her scope. And it's like, what the fuck is going on? So it's not uncommon for things like this to be happening all over the place in Metal Gear Solid 1. Cameron, anything to talk about with the design elements and things like that?
Yeah, so, this, like you said, the everything kind of ties together, and that filling in the lines in your own space. Particularly in the beginning of the game, there's a lot of sort of mystery aspects to it, and you kind of very quickly put together that people are keeping things from you, which is once again kind of in contrast to the thing of how you are, the greatest soldier that ever lived, brought out of retirement for one last job, and all these people are being super dodgy when you ask a million questions, as Snake is ought to do. And it continues to, you're on some small island in Alaska, and, you're infiltrating this base that you're slowly, diving further and further into. And, it keeps up with these cramped hallways and tiny areas. And one of the things about this game that really, is intended to, once again, kind of shock you is the realism and attention to detail. How many people remember the, whose footprints are these? And, like, again, for a PlayStation 1 era game, before the invention of the analog stick, AI was seeing your footprints in the snow and following them to where you were. Enemies had, like, multiple levels of alert stages where, once they saw you, they would chase you, and then after they lost sight of you, they would still actively look for you. This is,
How many
was,
of us have
and again,
anxiety from that goddamn "you've been discovered" sound?
yeah. Oh, yeah. And this is all so. This is like 3D graphics were new still. Like 3D graphics were novel, and all of this crazy realism stuff is happening in the game. And then you fight a tank and kill it with hand grenades. And then you fight an invisible ninja who can block all of your bullets with his sword, and you have to punch him to death. And there's the game starts with just this is the realest game you've ever played, and then this dude might be a ghost and he's got mind control. The sort of dissonance continues into again every corner and aspect of this work.
Keep going.
Yeah, so the whole conceit of the game is that it very deliberately relies on this contrast between the serious and the not serious, and this is in virtually every aspect of the game. Think about how your tutorial is done, right? Snake, you're on a sneaking mission. Your supplies are PoE. If you need to call me, press the select button. What the fuck is a select button? Are you talking to me? Or are you talking to Snake? Or am I Snake, right? So it kind of creates this weird dissonance between where your hands on the controller end and where the character you control on the screen begins.
And even better example of that in a codec call is one of the calls you can have with Master Miller is Snake comes in and he's like, I'm about to move into this new area, do you have any intel for me? And he's like, I don't really know anything about this area at all, but trust your instincts as a soldier and as a gamer. And the thing ends. And it's it was, I remember for me, it was this really shocking moment because we have all got the gamer instincts, right? There's something in that room because there's a dude outside, there's some goodies in there, and I need to make sure I go in there and get those goodies. You have those instincts that the game mentions, and it ties them closely to yes, you on the controller have this sort of meta knowledge that I'm playing a video game and I know that I get rewarded for doing specific things, and it ties that to your character of yes, Snake also has instincts as a soldier of knowing where things are, and it continues to blur this line between you and the main character.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we continue with our conversation about Metal Gear Solid 2, which many consider to be probably one of the best games in this series, although it's still one of the most critically disputed ones. So when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, I don't know, how many of you guys were around when Metal Gear Solid 2 dropped on the PlayStation 2? Okay. So I remember it because I was super excited for this. I was like, hell yes, Solid motherfucking Snake. I am going to play the shit out of this game. It's going to be amazing, right? And so I played through the demo and everything. And so I get the game and I'm sitting through it and 45 minutes in, the game is okay, here comes Raiden. And I'm just I did you what? The fuck is Raiden? What am I doing here, right? So the whole idea behind Metal Gear Solid 2 is that it's very intentionally meant to subvert everything about the game itself, not just in the world of the game, but also outside.
So Metal Gear, as we were talking about, has spent a lot of time up to this point making fun of video games. It's actively making fun of video games. It's you're not supposed to know that you're playing a game. We're going to shove it in your face that you're playing a game. Mm-hmm. It's built its own tropes making fun of video games, and now it's making fun of its own tropes about making fun of video games. This has gotten so self-aware, it's making fun of itself for what it's making fun of.
And, yes, sir.
Would it be accurate to call Solid Snake the Deadpool of video games?
Oh my god.
So, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
That's a great question. We'll come back to that. So, here's what Kojima himself had to say about this game. Was I scared that people might not be happy about the new character? Not really. In the sequel, you have to meet people's expectations, but you also sort of have to go against and deceive them, I think. This is my Metal Gear, and I can destroy it if I want to. Anything to say on that from a postmodern lens?
Yeah, it's very much, so like we talked about with modernism, the author decides everything. The author is in charge of everything. Hideo Kojima sort of went you guys can have your opinions and I'm going to have mine. Basically. He got so sort of frustrated with how people were interacting with the game and how people were reacting to him as an artist. Because you remember, people kind of hounded him for his opinion about things. People were constantly asking him questions about these games. And he was like, I don't care. Leave me alone. Make your fan art. make your cosplay, don't ask me questions.
Right. Pretty
Don't
much.
do this. And so he kept sort of like shoving more and more at people in hopes that they would sort of make up their own answers and leave him alone. And that's kind of exactly what he's doing here.
And you can tell that he's very subtly making fun of the whole thing. Like the design of Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid 2 is kind of testament to that, right? Because we go from the very traditional soldier look to like this goofy mullet that he has into and the skin-tight bodysuit that barely does anything to cover his junk. And then we get Raiden, which...
Oh.
The twink.
The sword
The
twink.
twink.
Everyone was so mad about Raiden. They're like, I don't want to be this. I want to be the big bad man with the gun. Why am I this?
Yeah, and Raiden is essentially the antithesis of everything Solid Snake is, if you really think about it.
He's so whiny.
He's whiny. He's not really that good at his job. Like, notice that one of the first things you do on the big shell is like when you're just running around in that first area after you get through the elevator and get up top, there's bird poop up there. And you can run into bird poop and you can slip and fall on your ass on bird poop.
That's one of your first impressions of this new character. You're like, oh, this isn't Snake. And you're like, oh, this really isn't Snake.
Keep in mind,
Hideo Kojima is actively making fun of
I want to
him at this
remind you
moment.
guys that you keep this in mind. Everything so the game is still a closed system. It's there only because the person who put it there allows it to be there. It's not emergent gameplay.
This is
You're
not, the Starbucks cup that ended up on the table in Game of Thrones.
Right.
Everything that's there is there for a reason.
So
Someone had to make it.
so the fact that Kojima put it there is intentional and deliberate, and it's very clearly delineated as like, we are making fun of this dude, right? And of course, Raiden grows over the course of the game, like from start to finish. Like he goes from like just some dipshit that slips in bird poop to like, I have a fucking sword and I'm gonna kill like 500 guys with it, and then I'm gonna destroy Wall Street. I mean, literally, right? And then I'm gonna fight this Dr. Octopus motherfucker with like 8 arms and a sword, and I'm gonna win. On the back of a giant Metal Gear that's also a factory for Metal Gears. Like, I mean, it goes crazy, right? Oh, by the way, this panel has spoilers.
If you haven't played them yet, I'm sorry.
If you have, I'm actually more sorry. So, but like, the whole premise of this game is essentially to just kind of hold up a giant middle finger to the entire series up to this point. Because in a way, I think Kojima didn't really have his heart set on making a sequel to Metal Gear Solid 1, right? He didn't really want to make... Yep, Cameron, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and the thing is that, like, with all of this, like, haha, we're dunking on, like, everything that Metal Gear is, this is also... is technically impressive as Metal Gear Solid 1 was, and as we kind of go back and look at it, we're like, oh, I can see how this would be impressive 20 years ago. Like, this game still is impressive today. Like, the technical pieces that they put on this are absolutely insane. It was one of the first games to utilize the pressure-sensitive buttons that the PlayStation actually had, where a soft press and a hard press do different things. There are so many tiny details that are so in-depth and took so much time to do and to do well. Like, there is, in the very beginning of the game, there is a bucket of ice, and if you shoot it, it will fall over. The ice will come out of the bucket as individual cubes, and over time they will melt into a puddle of water that you can step in and then leave wet footprints around. Like,
That the enemy soldiers can then find
Yes.
and follow
this is
you.
not... And this is not something that the game ever points out to you. Otacon never comes on the Codex is like, hey, Snake, make sure you don't shoot over that bucket, otherwise the ice will spill out and then melt, and then you'll leave footprints. It is just a bucket of ice that 99% of players will walk by. But some poor programmer had to spend months putting this shit together in a way that didn't crash the entire PlayStation for 12 people to notice. Because this was, again, before the internet was like, your game forums, where if you wanted a walkthrough for a game, you would go into your computer room, you would wait a little bit for your, game FAQ to open with a big ASCII art of Metal Gear at the top. You would hit print, hope your mom didn't notice that you spent half of her ink cartridge on like a big stack of paper. You would bring your folder into the living room and like flip through the pages to figure out where you were in the game so you could solve the next puzzle. Like, this wasn't like, okay, this will go viral the internet, and he'll get us a lot of free press.
So,
And
Cameron, tell me you're not 30 without telling me you're not 30, because at this time, Brady Games still made walkthrough guides that you got to purchase. Brady Games.
the
Yeah. Do
books.
you guys remember this shit? Like, they had these books that you had to buy for, like, Final Fantasy VII, and you couldn't beat it without them? Anyway.
I remember my library had them, and you could check them out.
But yeah, so this game, like, as much as it's like, on one level, it's, you don't get to play as Snake. You get to play as, a blonde slip-on shit twink boy who has a worse ass than Snake. This was a fight that Kojima had with the art team where they were like, he was like, okay, Snake's ass needs to be better than Raiden's ass. Just like it needs to be bigger, fuller, it needs to be more detailed, it needs to be better to look at. And the art team was like, okay, but you're going to be looking at Raiden's ass throughout the entire game. You're never going to really see Snake's ass. Shouldn't we make Raiden's ass better? Kojima was absolutely not. Like, there's so much that is saying, fuck you to the player, but then also as you're playing the game, it's like, the bodies don't disappear anymore. If you leave them there, like, someone else will come from the other corner of the base to go get lunch in the cafeteria and find the body. Like, the technical and gameplay and game design and everything of this game is so deep and in-depth and crafted with so much just, like, love and care and attention to detail. And the gameplay experience is stellar. It's stunning. But at the same time, you can't help but feel like, you're getting, like, the most caring, affectionate middle finger of your life.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what's happening. So again, these ideas of, making fun of yourself, camp, a bit of a, misdirection, and again, audience interpretation and interaction with the artwork is what creates the meaning of it.
This is true. I hate to be the one to point out this part of Metal Gear Solid 2, but I feel like this is kind of a crucial thing. So at the very beginning of the game, you are asked to input your name and your date of birth. And this is just the thing. It never comes back until the very end where you get this. So you have your fight with Solidus, and then Snake hands you the thing.
Who am I, really? No one quite knows who or what they are. The memories you have and the role you were assigned are burdens you had to carry. It doesn't matter if they were real or not. That's never the point. There's no such thing in the world as absolute reality. Most of what they call real is actually
the game
fiction.
literally explains the plot to you.
What you think you see is only as real as your brain tells you it is.
Then, what am I supposed to believe in? What am I going to leave behind when I'm through?
We can tell other people about having faith. What we had faith in. What we found important enough to fight for. It's not whether you were right or wrong, but how much faith you were willing to have. That decides the future. The Patriots are a kind of ongoing fiction too, come to think of it.
Yeah.
I want to show the part where he literally hands you the dog tags with your name on it. I think it's right here.
By the way, what is that?
There it is. And so,
Dog tags.
and that's the name that you put in, your nationality, your date of birth, all of your information. So, let's pause for thought. What does that tell us? So it tells us two things. One is that it tells us that the boundary between reality and game is blurred, and two is that you're Raiden in this situation.
You don't get to be Snake. You don't get to be the cool one.
You're just some fucking loser who slips in bird poop.
You're sitting on your ass playing your PlayStation 2, freaking out about a bucket of ice, you moron. Go do something with your life.
But yeah, like, and then the thing is, like, after this absolutely mind-shattering realization, we go into I Can't Say Goodbye to Yesterday, where, we just have this absolutely...
Do you remember this play?
Sequence, I think.
Children.
Yep, right there.
To teach that to our children.
What kind of things?
About the environment, our ideas, our
So
culture.
they have this entire big philosophical discussion about what it is that we pass on to the next generation. So effectively, this kind of symbolizes that this is the end of the series, except, you thought.
Except-
It keeps going.
Capitalism.
Yes, because Konami are a bunch of greedy dipshits. We have Metal Gear Solid 3. Cameron, go ahead and take over with this one, because this is one of your favorites.
Yes. So this one is super cool because, like I touched on earlier, they needed to sell more PlayStations. And once again, Kojima said, okay, but this game is going to be super different than anything ever before. So it takes place so far back in the past. One of the key parts of the Metal Gear games was, being in the distant future of 2005. There was so much like cool technology, like the Soliton radar, where you could see, where all the guards were and where they were looking, and the Nikita missile launcher, which was a remote-controlled missile that you could, drive around remotely, and all this like really advanced, sci-fi basically stuff. And now you're in the Cold War. You don't have a Soliton radar, but you don't have like all of these things. But what you do have, once again, in that disconnect, is you have this was a late PlayStation 2 game, so they really could take a lot of advantage over the hardware in ways that they couldn't before, where a later, release of the game, Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, you actually have a free camera that you can move around, which is the first time in the series. Not
originally, because originally it was a fixed angle camera.
Yeah,
it was
in the
only
re-release
with the
of
Subsistence edition did they actually add that.
Yeah. You've got your free camera that you can move around. You've got instead of your active camouflage bodysuit, you have to actually put on different camouflages and go up against certain colors of things, and that determines how easy or hard it is for guards to find you. The disconnect here is that we have some of the most advanced video game technology ever, but also you are some schmuck with a handgun. Your codec is now like literally a radio with a headphone piece that you have in your ear. Of course, obviously, the entire game is, on one half focused on realism, where you have to eat and, manually like remove the bullet from yourself and, sew it up and apply antiseptic and put a bandage on. The realism is once again cranked up to 11. And then there's the man who has bees in him, and his bees can get him a gun, and he shoots bees out of his mouth, not from his bee gun, from his bee mouth. And the bees will go inside of you and poison them unless you take the bees out of you. And you can also throw a bee grenade. Not to mention the man with a very long tongue who likes to climb in trees like a spider, or the astronaut in the basement who has a jetpack.
Because that's where astronauts hang out, in basements.
Yes. So
every single game, I really do feel like, up to a certain point, Kojima was like, what sort of inane bullshit can I get away with and still have people tout these as some of the most like immersive, realistic games of all time? Yeah, and it's partway because, you fight the jetpack astronaut man, and then while he's dying, he's telling you about how like he was sent to space, and like his entire crew like burned up upon re-entry, and he's horribly traumatized because of it. And if he ever takes off the suit, he feels like he's gonna burn up, like, and he's totally just, his mind is just fucked beyond all belief. And you laughed at him, and he's like, he's fucked up. You're a bad person. And then right after that, literally right after that, you climb a ladder. And that is, unironically, I am not messing with you, the best part of the damn game, because this ladder, you're like, all right, I was in a basement, I gotta climb out of the basement, right? I get on a ladder, whatever. So you jump on the ladder, and by the way, this is not a cutscene that you can put down your controller, go to the bathroom, get a like cookie from the cookie jar. You have to hold up on the controller, and you don't have wireless controllers, right? Like, you are tethered to your PlayStation here. So you're sitting there for a second, you're like climbing the ladder, and then you're like, this is a long ladder, and then the rhythmic like tap 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 begins to echo through the cavern of Snake climbing the ladder, and you are forced to. You don't have your iPhone where you can scroll through Facebook. You have to sit and think about this video game now. You have literally no other choice. And right about when that time hits, where you're like, wow, I've done like a lot. Like I've killed a lot of people. Like I've like in the middle of uncovering like a massive conspiracy theory to like overthrow maybe Russia, maybe the United States, maybe China. I don't know. This dude has lightning powers, and you're really like trying to piece everything together. And you're like, I know this makes sense if I just think about it. And then all of a sudden you notice that in the background, the main theme of the game has been quietly swelling up in the background and has reached like cathartic moments of just like intimacy between you and the game. It really is just that quiet moment between like you and someone that you really care about, where you are just spending time together, not talking, just enjoying each other's company, and it's a fucking video game. Like this shit is insane. Like there's so few pieces of art that can, like particularly like interactive art in Medium, where how you engage with it is you do nothing, right? Like imagine if a movie just cut to black for 10 minutes. You would like fast forward or see if your DVD player broke. Like this game takes this ability to be quiet and shut the hell up for 5 minutes and like really make you think about everything that's going on. And then you come out on the side of a hilltop and there's a helicopter chasing you, and then you got to kill a bunch of dudes and get on the anti-aircraft gun and blow up the helicopter, and then your major comes on the radio. He's like, Snake, that was incredible! And
Yeah.
Except he says it with a British accent. So,
Yeah.
so it's like, that was jolly good, Snake. Anyway, so speaking of the major, so all the supporting characters in games, like if you want to talk about intertextuality, which is yet another interesting component of postmodernism, this game has it coming out of every possible orifice. So for starters, every single character constantly quotes movies and other media at you. The major is like a film buff, right? Paramedic loves Godzilla movies and comic books. And then at the same time, if you really, really know your film, and if you really watch carefully, you'll start to begin realizing that, oh no, is this game actually an adaptation of the 1959 classic North by Northwest starring Cary Grant, which itself is a parody of James Bond movies? It is. It is.
Or is it?
No, it
The
totally
answer is
is.
subjective.
Are you telling me that North by Northwest has a man made of bees?
Okay, I said an adaptation.
Alex, are you telling me how to interpret this video game? Because I believe your wife has a couple of words about that whole aspect.
So, I mean, but there's also like the pervasive law of threes, because it's Metal Gear Solid 3, right? Everything has to happen in threes. Like, the boss kicks Snake's ass 3 times. Ava tries to have sex with Snake 3 times. He rejects her 3 times. There's like certain things that happen in 3. It's just like everywhere, every single thing. And the fact is that Snake himself is kind of a fascinating character in this whole situation, right? So he's presented as this like macho, like masculinity coming out of the ass, like dude. But like, think about it. He's totally respectful to women. He never once tries to like mac on Ava, except when she shows him her gun. That's not a euphemism. She's just like, hey, look at my Mauser. He's like, that's really cool.
And then he like orgasms over the handgun that she gives him, of like,
Yes.
custom
Yes.
engraved, like so I can hold my knife in CQC, and like a double action slide with greased bearings, and like this like gorgeous woman in a motorcycle suit with like zip down past her titties, and he's like, oh, a handgun.
Complete opposite of any film protagonist you've ever seen at that time.
And the boss herself, like the boss is a fascinating character. Not to like draw attention to you, but like
So the boss is one of my favorite characters ever, if you couldn't tell. So the interesting thing is that, one of the things that this game does really, really well is it pushes the idea of subjective reality at you. Like with what Cameron was talking about with the climbing the ladder and like forcing you to relive things. The boss is one of the best examples of this that I've ever seen in media, because she absolutely destroys you. She is straight up a villain, but she's not. At the end, you find out she's actually a good guy. She is actually doing the right things. She is never incorrect for breaking your hand and throwing you off a bridge. You're just a fucking idiot who didn't know. But at that time, with the information that you had, of course she was a villain. Of course she was an asshole. She broke your hand and threw you off a bridge.
And then blew up a nuke. She shot it.
Yeah, and you're
No,
like, of course
Volgan
she's a
shoots it.
fucking
Volgan
terrorist. Of
fires
course
the nuke.
I have to stop her.
He makes Boss do it.
Does he? I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah,
him.
he makes Boss do it.
Okay.
He hands it to Boss, and that's the thing. That's why that she couldn't be redeemed because she shot the nuke.
Okay, fair enough. All right, very good. I think we can move on to Metal Gear Solid 4, which is, despite the fact that I've never played this game, it is one of my favorites because it's so janky.
Yes.
It's
Real quick, we will stop at 11:20 for questions, so if
Yes.
you have questions, hold on to them. We'll save 10
Yep.
minutes at the end.
we're gonna blow through Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5, unfortunately, because we kind of ended up.
I mean, these were the
starting
ones
late.
that Kojima didn't want to make, so they're not quite.
Oh,
as, you know-
fantastic! All right, I get to mention the thing that I absolutely have to mention in this game and provide no context because we have to move. Monkey in a diaper hands you a soda can. All right.
That's it. That's it.
That's it.
Metal Gear Solid
Well, I
5.
do want to show one thing. One of the things that this game is particularly known for is its really piss poor localization. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the scene where you get to fight Ocelot for the last time. So you guys all know the scene I'm talking about, right? Fox Die? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's watch this. So it's the way that it's handled in the English translation. Here we go.
Snake! Fox!
And this is just pure campiness right here. He dies, and it's so dramatic. And then it's like, surprise, bitch!
Think again!
Right. It's like, he's just like, one of my friends described him as the turd that wouldn't flush. But yeah, same thing in the Japanese.
Snake! Fox! Die!
But here's the difference.
Jenny!
But first of all, it's the way he says Janai, just with this, like, it's pure camp at this point. But it's also in the translation, right? So Janai is not really translatable. It's sort of like you thought, but it rhymes, right? Because it's Fox Die, Janai. Like, there's a rhythm to it. It's like the rain in Spain falls mainly on plains. Like, it's not really something that's translatable. It's just a thing. And when they tried to localize this game, this is everywhere here. Like, every facet of this game is just riddled with poor localization, which is why so much of the original context is lost. And I actually have spoken to a number of people who have played this game in the original Japanese, and they're like, oh, dude, it's so much better. Like, if you understand the language, if you're culturally sensitive and aware, this game takes on a whole new dimension. Like, the localization for MGS4 did not do this game justice at all. Cameron, do you have anything to say about this one?
Yeah, it's, as we've talked about, every single game takes these massive, massive leaps in terms of, originality and realism. And this game plays the most like Call of Duty. Like, honestly, it's a little bit more open world. Like, it's a still linear level progression system, but it feels a little bit more open to it. There's a lot more fighting that happens in it. The weapons and ammo are way more plentiful. Like, you never really have to worry about resources or, managing your own bullets or health or any of that. And like, it's the plot is the most off the wall batshit insane one that has been in the series yet. But that sort of like tight care, like the game controls well. Like, if you go back and play Metal Gear Solid 1, it takes you a good solid hour or two to like be able to not run Snake into walls. It's clunky. It's real clunky. And this game still plays like fine on a technical level, but it doesn't feel like a Metal Gear game. Like, sneaking is frankly optional in this game. Like, you can guns blazing take down everyone if you feel so inclined to. But it really is plot wise. It's the writing we mentioned is a little bit, but plot wise it really is. It's the end. It's the finale. Everyone comes back on stage to do a bow. There is, every little plot hole, every little thread is tied up nicely. And like I mentioned at the end, they fly off into the sunset. This is Kojima's like, I'm done. There's no more. Nothing can come after this. I mean, Rising Revengeance happened, but that's Snake isn't even involved in that one. No more Metal Gear. It's not like there cannot be any more Metal Gear after this, and there isn't, chronologically speaking.
Yes, but there is one after this. So we probably have just a few minutes to talk about Metal Gear Solid 5, so I'm going to be really brief about it.
That's all it deserves.
One of the interesting things about it is that, of course, there's this missing link interpretation that it's supposed to be the missing link between everything that happens up to Metal Gear Solid or Metal Gear 1 and everything that comes before it. And this game is literally just the Metal Gear Kojima did not want to make. Like, it's also unfinished. Like, there's parts of this game that are missing. Like, imagine watching Star Wars. So you're watching Star Wars, right? And then the next movie is not there, and then you're skipping straight ahead to Return of the Jedi. And there's just chunks of context missing. And you have no idea why, and you have no idea like why these characters leave or why they appear and what their motivations are, and you're just kind of like, okay, I guess I'm going with this. But probably one of the most interesting postmodern beats in this game is that at the beginning, you get this, again, spoiler alert, you get to create your character. Right? You create your character, and then for some reason you just never use that character you just created. It's a pretty robust character creator. Like, it's like Skyrim, not Skyrim, like let's just say it's Code Vein level of intensity, right? So you spend all this time making your character, and then just boom, like it's never done again. Until you get to the very end, at which point you get this song playing, The Man Who Sold the World, by David Bowie, which is about a person who feels uncomfortable in his own skin. And you get this. You walk up to a mirror. You look into it. There's your venom snake. He picks up a tape from The Man Who Sold the World. It very deliberately shows you what's on the tape. He looks at it. And then there is a time forward. Literally, right here, there is a flash forward in time. And that's the character you create at the beginning and the end. So that's a mindfuck, to put it mildly. Right? So this entire time, you thought you were playing as Big Boss, and you're literally just some guy. You're the medic that was on the helicopter during Ground Zeroes. Like, you're a nobody, right? And again, this kind of harkens back to the preconceived notions about heroism from Metal Gear Solid 2, but this is so much more of a hardened slap in the face because you've spent all this time with this character, dozens, if not like hundreds of hours playing this game, and this is it. Like, this is your big reveal. The other thing, of course, is that there's tons and tons of different ideas that are interspersed throughout this. Like, for instance, this notion of a nation without boundaries, which is, of course, echoed by the Here's to You song from the Sacco and Vanzetti movie. It's just kind of riddled with these subtle little references to postmodernism that are interspersed throughout. So, Cameron, anything?
5 is not done. like Alex mentioned at the beginning, it's supposed to be. It had the potential to be so interesting, and I remember being so excited for this game because it was supposed to be like the fall of Big Boss. Like, this is like Big Boss and Peace Walker's a cool dude. Like, he's he's a little bit misguided, but like his heart's in the right place, and especially the Big Boss we see in 3. Like, he's just a little guy. He's a friend. And the big boss that we see later in the game is like, has child soldiers and like takes over countries and like holds the entire world hostage with nukes. And 5 was supposed to be like, yeah, here's the fall of a character that you really like. And then well, I think he's got probably about 12 lines in the 60-hour game. Like, it is just like there's really nothing happening here in this game, and it's really, really unfortunate that the one of these this great narrative of just absolute off the wall insanity like really went out with like a sad whimper.
Yeah. But then Big Boss does show up at the end on his motorcycle with his like cool guy shit. And he's like, yeah, thanks for distracting them for me, asshole, while I did the real crimes.
Yeah, no, this game is very much like, how dare you make me make another one of these? Like, this is Metal Gear Solid 2, but without the like care.
Yeah.
This is not a polite middle finger. This is a, oh, this guy was off doing all the cool stuff, and not only did you not know until now when you're about to put the game down, but also you're never gonna know what the cool stuff he did was. And I mean literally never, as in I'm gone, I don't have access to the license anymore. Like, there will be no more Metal Gear games ever. The one that happens is a spin-off with zombies. Like, you don't get to know the cool stuff that Big Boss did because, like, we don't have the time and space for that.
Yep. So speaking of, let's go ahead and wrap this up. I just kind of want to very quickly run down what we've talked about today, give you a brief bibliography, and just, in case you have any questions for us, give you our contact information. So once again, the core themes of Metal Gear basically revolve around a lot of postmodern stuff, like identity and the self, technology as both benefit and a hazard, nuclear non-proliferation, lies and betrayal, control and freedom, and things like that. But the narrative elements are really there to prop those ideas up, like deliberate subversion of expectations, the death of the author, breaking the fourth wall, the idea of camp and intertextuality.
Yep. Absolutely.
So yeah, and it's like, I mean, this isn't even like scratching the surface of like all the stuff that's in
the first time we did this panel, it was 3 hours long. And we got so much more in, but I can't ask you to sit here for 3 hours.
that
I
would be
did 3-hour
inhumane.
art history lectures in college. It's hell.
Like, even about Metal Gear, like, it's still like, this is way too fucking much. I mean, though, at one point, like, we were bouncing red turtle shells off my ass, so
Yeah,
maybe
it
it was
got-
kind of entertaining.
It got a little off kilter.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyway, so if you're interested, there's a partial bibliography at this Google Doc.
Yes.
If you want,
If
you
you
can
have-
take a
if you want
picture
to
of
know-
this. And then our contact information is all right here.
Yes.
So again, feel free to take a picture of this slide right
Yes.
there.
If you have questions, if a month from now you're in the shower and you're like, hey, I should have asked them that, please message us.
And at this time, I would love to hand this over to any of you who have any questions for any of us.
Yes.
So just come on up, grab a microphone, and go for it.
Yes. I will set. We're gonna have an audience microphone for the sake.
Oh, perfect. How about this?
Yeah. Yes. Any questions, anything like that? Grab that microphone.
Trying to make sure I have this close enough that you can hear me, but not
Yeah.
like blow it out. So, hi.
Thank you for coming. Thank you to everyone who just ran out of the room.
Yeah, we understand.
We appreciate you listening to us talk at a mile an hour.
So I actually haven't played any Metal Gear games, but the vast majority of my friends, they're like their favorite video game series of all time. So I've been watching one of my friends play through Metal Gear Solid 3, and there's a part that I can't stop thinking about, and it's got postmodern elements to it, but it's so many layers deep that I'm
Yes.
just trying to figure out what the fuck is happening.
Yeah, that's kind of how it's supposed to work. Like, that's how it
Good.
works, is there's so many different layers to interpret that it's up to your own interpretation as to what it means.
So just, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on it. Specifically, this is the part where Big Boss picks up a glowing mushroom and calls, I think it's Major about it, and is like, hey, if I eat this, it'll charge my battery, right?
Yeah,
And she's like, I don't think that's true. You probably shouldn't eat glowing mushrooms. And then you do eat the glowing mushroom, and it does charge your battery.
yes.
And there's an optional, you can call her back and be like, hey, I ate the mushroom like you told me to. It totally worked. And she's like, what? What do you mean? Hold on. And you hear like an entire separate conversation that she has with somebody else, like, he ate the mushroom and it fucking charged his battery. What do you think? I don't know. Just go with it. Just let him do it. It charged the battery. We don't need to summon another battery. It's fine. What?
Okay, so the way that I sort of look at that scene, which I'll let these people who are actual Metal Gear experts talk about it, is that at this time, pretty much the only way to get through certain things in video games was to talk to your friends about it or buy a guide online. How many of you guys remember the fake guides that existed? Where like they would tell you, like everyone remembers the like schoolyard rumor of Mew under the truck? And there was always a kid who insisted that they did it and no one believed them. That's sort of what I'm assuming that's parodying. Is that like, you have the gamer instinct of it's glowing, I need to react to it, I need to interact with it, I need to do something with it. And, you know, your friends tell you to do it, and so you fucking do it, and it actually works, and everyone's like, what? No?
This is also kind of like what Dark Souls does with the writings on the floor.
Yeah, so it's that's my sort of interpretation of the scene, is that it's sort of pushing that whole, like, being a gamer in a social context. And those instincts that you build.
You want to know what my interpretation of that scene is? It's Kojima saying, fuck around and find out.
Yeah, and then my piece is like actually the characterization of Snake in that sense, where we're told over and over and over again like how smart Snake is, how he has like an IQ of like 212, and he's like a tactical genius and all of that. But every single representation we see of him is like, ooh, tasty. Ooh, gun, I like. You know, like, he's stupid. Like, he's a dumb dude. Like, he's not smart.
He's a bro.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that kind of plays into that piece of dissonance of it. Of like, again, like he's like, oh, I ate it like you told me to, even though she clearly said don't eat that. Like he was just like, ooh, food, hungry, batteries, yes.
Yes. All right.
Awesome, thank you guys.
No
If
problem.
you have a question, just grab the
Yeah, grab the
microphone.
microphone.
Hi, yeah.
Hello.
I've also not played any Metal Gear games, but I do have a friend who's very into Metal Gear. Came to this panel because I kind of expected he would be here, but I don't think he is. So one thing I have seen is I've seen him play Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
Oh, good.
Now, I feel like you deliberately left that one out because it isn't quite as metatextual, but it does feel kind of like very aggressively a parody of American politics. Senator Make America Great Again Armstrong. So I was wondering sort of your opinion on some of the things from that.
So the reason we left Metal Gear Rising out is because it's not a Hideo Kojima game. So it was developed by Platinum Studios, which specializes in character action games. So the story and the plot, in my view, is kind of tertiary to the slicey dicey action. Raiden is also portrayed very, very differently than he is in Metal Gear Solid 2 and 4. So it's kind of, technically it's a non-canon game. But, you know, it does make some interesting observations, however ham-fisted they may be. I just don't think it's quite as metatextually campy and self-aware as Metal Gear, because I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to go for the same vibe, but when you try to emulate camp, you invariably end up with something that isn't camp. So.
Have you ever seen anyone try to parody Divine from the early John Waters films? It doesn't work. You can't parody that because you just end up looking a fucking idiot.
Camp is both self-aware and not. So there's a reason Elton John works, right? There's a reason that we still love Elton John like 40 years after he got his start in the Jets. It's because this motherfucker could show up in a Donald Duck suit and play a piano and like play the living bejesus out of a song. And it's the same thing here. Like this motherfucker just slips on some bird poop. Okay? I'm never letting the bird poop thing go. I'm sorry. But like he slips on some bird poop and suddenly we're like, oh, art.
All right.
Let's have like.
I saw you move toward the microphone first. Okay.
Because we do have to make room for ahead
All
and
right.
do that.
We got like
I'll make this quick. I'm repeating my question from last time.
Yes.
Would you say that Solid Snake is the Deadpool of video games? Yes or
I
no?
don't think he's that smart.
Nor is he that self-aware. Deadpool is aware that he occupies a meta-narrative. Solid Snake is not. He's very much a contextual character. So, for me, that's where we're at.
Fair point.
Yeah, interestingly, actually, Snake never. There's so many fourth wall breaks in Metal Gear, and none of them are ever done by Snake.
Yes. Okay.
So, Snake might be the only character who isn't.
Yeah, I think he's the only one who isn't aware. And yeah,
It'll be short, sorry.
yeah, go ahead, absolutely.
Okay, hey, so just kind of follow up on the Rising question, actually. So there's a lot of instances in Metal Gear by Kojima, almost like, quote unquote, predicting the future with a lot of scenes and a lot of things that happen, including the quotes that about politics. So I'm wondering if that is part of like just the art of it. Is that like a thing that actually happens often where like, you know, with the memes or whatever, there's always something that comes up and it's like, oh, did Kojima know all along? Like, is that part of the art that he's going for?
If you're asking me if he's prescient, no. I can pretty much guarantee you that ghosts aren't real. That's a quote from Metal Gear. But I would say that he's probably, like, so as somebody who was born in the aftermath of probably one of the lowest points in Japanese history, and as somebody who is Japanese, he has a very unique and insightful perspective on world politics from the standpoint of the aggressee as opposed to the aggressor, right? Here, I don't mean to get on my fucking communist rant, so like if you want to tune me out, just whatever, it's fine. But the point is that as Americans, we have the unique privilege of only looking at the world through a very particular lens, and that is the lens of the power that is on top. The moment you put yourselves in the shoes of somebody who does not come from a major superpower that is essentially capable of destroying the world 81 times over with just a press of a button, you start looking at things very differently. You start noticing certain patterns and developments in the trends that define world politics. And so I think for Kojima, this was very much a part and parcel of being born in Japan in the 1950s. You were still dealing with the fallout, both literally and figuratively, of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. You were still in an economic crisis that was largely dominated by American politics. And so there were a lot of factors that contributed to his emergent worldviews as a Japanese citizen in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and all the way into the 1980s, because Japan developed in very different trajectories than the United States did. They also went through their phase of elite corporatism, but that phase of elite corporatism basically started grinding them into the dirt by doing just insane amounts of work and centering their entire identity around employment in the 1970s and early 1980s. We're only now starting to realize this in our culture in 2022. For Japan, this realization came a long time ago. So what I'm getting at is that it's probably fair to say that Kojima is a much more insightful observer of world politics and of how these trends develop and emerge over time than we as his gamers are.
The other thing that we pointed out is that he's a big fan of Western pop culture, huge fan of Western pop culture, which at the time was kind of difficult to do in Japan. It's sort of like if you were a nerd in the 80s and you tried to get your hands on anything other than like what was on TV, it just wasn't, it was so difficult. And in order to understand media from an entirely different culture, you do have to study that culture to some degree. Because guess what? Certain scenes just aren't going to make sense unless you sort of understand the culture that created them. So he has this really great way of digging into understanding not just, American media, but American politics and American culture and like the American zeitgeist in order to understand American media, which I think makes him a much more worldly citizen, which means that he gets to sort of watch these, he sort of, I don't say he would like predict things happening, but he definitely starts to see the patterns between his own culture and the culture that he's studying aggressively.
Well, the other issue is that world politics aren't really some sort of arcane mythical thing. They're pretty predictable. You just have to be a keen student of history to see that actions have consequences, and they may be short or long-term consequences, but like they're almost always predictable in very foreseeable ways. So that's a great question, actually.
Wonderful
Thank you so
question.
much.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and call it here because I think
Yes.
there's a panel right after us. So thank you all so much for sticking around. I appreciate it.
Again, if you did not take pictures of the socials, we'll put it back up. Thank you again for listening to us talk super frickin' fast.
This was a lot. Thank you, Cameron. We're gonna leave you now.
Bye, everybody.